December 1943. High Command declared the P-38 Lightning a maintenance nightmare, unsuited for European theatre. Too complex, too temperamental, too expensive. Then a 22-year-old farm boy from Iowa with barely 200 flight hours took one into German airspace and returned having obliterated 27 enemy formations in a single mission that strategists deemed statistically impossible. What happened in those frozen skies would force every general to burn their tactical manuals. March 15, 1943, 0600 hours, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. The morning air tasted of aviation fuel and doubt. Inside Hangar 7, frost clung to the twin-boom fuselage of a Lockheed P-38 Lightning as Colonel James Harker circled the aircraft with the enthusiasm of a man inspecting a coffin. The temperature hovered at 34 degrees. Through the hangar's open doors, mechanics in oil-stained coveralls worked on conventional P-47 Thunderbolts. Reliable, proven, uncomplicated. The P-38 sat, abandoned. 17 critical failures in 23 sorties, Harker read from his clipboard, breath visible in the cold air. Turbocharger seizures at altitude. Cockpit heating systems failing at -40 degrees, pilots losing fingers to frostbite, counter-rotating propellers causing torque issues that spin rookies into the ground. Lockheed promised us a revolutionary interceptor. They delivered a widowmaker. Lieutenant Robert "Buck" Williamson stood at attention, 22 years old, fresh from advanced training at Luke Field in Arizona. His service record showed 187 flight hours, barely enough to qualify for combat assignment. He'd grown up on a 400-acre farm outside Des Moines, learned to fix tractors before he could drive, enlisted 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor. The P-38 before him represented everything military procurement officers feared: innovation without proven reliability. "Sir, with respect," Buck began. "Lieutenant, the European Theatre Command has formally requested we cease P-38 deployments," Harker interrupted. "General Spaatz himself called these aircraft operationally unsuitable. The turbocharged Allison engines fail in the cold. The intercooler system freezes. The concentrated firepower, 4 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, means nothing if the pilot can't keep the damn thing airborne." Statistical reality supported Harker's assessment. Between January and March 1943, P-38 squadrons recorded a 73% mechanical abort rate in European operations. For every 10 aircraft that took off, 7 returned early with critical malfunctions. Maintenance crews needed 60 hours of work per flight hour, triple the requirement of P-47s or P-51s. The Lightning consumed spare parts like a factory furnace, and supply chains couldn't keep pace. But Buck saw something different when he looked at that twin-engine frame. He saw speed, 443 miles per hour in level flight, faster than any German fighter except the experimental jets. He saw range, 1,300 miles with drop tanks, allowing bomber escort deep into Reich territory where Focke-Wulf 190s massacred unprotected B-17s. He saw concentrated nose-mounted firepower, eliminating convergence issues that plagued wing-mounted guns. He saw an aircraft designed by brilliant minds at Lockheed's Burbank facility, engineered for high-altitude interception, capable of things conventional fighters couldn't achieve, if only someone learned to fly it properly. "Colonel, permission to speak freely," Buck said. Harker glanced up from his clipboard, eyebrows raised. "I've read every maintenance report. The failures aren't design flaws, they're operational misunderstandings. Pilots are managing the engines like single-engine aircraft. They're advancing throttles unevenly, creating asymmetric thrust. They're not preheating the intercoolers before ascending to combat altitude. The turbochargers seize because crews aren't following Lockheed's cold weather procedures buried in a 600-page technical manual that most pilots never read. You've read a 600-page manual?" Harker's skepticism was palpable. 3 times, sir. Also corresponded with Lockheed's chief test pilot, Tony Levier. He walked me through every system. The P-38 isn't temperamental, it's sophisticated. It requires understanding, not brute force. Back home, we had a threshing machine that seized up constantly until Dad and I figured out the manufacturer's timing specifications. Same principle here. Respect the engineering, operate within parameters, and the machine performs miracles. Parker studied the young lieutenant, farm kid from Iowa, face still carrying remnants of adolescent softness. Service cap slightly too large, uniform pressed but showing wear at the cuffs. The colonel had commanded flight operations for 11 months, watched promising young men transform into casualties because their equipment failed at critical moments. The P-38 program represented millions of taxpayer dollars, thousands of engineering hours, and a failure rate that made procurement officers apoplectic. The aircraft has been officially classified as unsuitable for European theater, Harker repeated. High Command wants them reassigned to the Pacific, where warmer weather reduces mechanical issues. You're suggesting we ignore that directive? I'm suggesting we give the Lightning one properly trained pilot before we abandon the program entirely, Buck replied. Let me prove the aircraft works if operated correctly. If I fail, you can cite my failure as final evidence and decommission every P-38 in inventory. But if I succeed, if this aircraft performs as Lockheed designed it to, we'll have the fastest, longest-range fighter in the European theater. We'll have an escort capable of protecting bomber groups all the way to Berlin and back. We'll have a platform that can intercept German formations before they reach our bombers. Silence filled the hangar. Outside, a P-47 engine roared to life, the familiar thunder of a radial engine that rarely failed, rarely complicated maintenance schedules, rarely required 600-page manuals. Practical, reliable, conventional. The P-38 sat in frost-covered silence, waiting for someone to believe in it. You understand that if this aircraft fails you at altitude, you'll likely die, Harker asked quietly. Engine seizure at 30,000 feet over enemy territory means no bailout, no rescue, no second chances. Your mother in Iowa will receive a telegram saying her son vanished over Germany, testing an aircraft his own military deemed unfit for combat. Buck met the colonel's gaze directly. Sir, my mother will receive that telegram anyway if we keep sending bomber crews into German airspace without adequate escort. B-17 losses are running 20% per mission on deep penetration raids. That's unsustainable. That's 60 young men per lost bomber, crews from Nebraska and Texas and California, dying because German fighters massacre them over targets we need destroyed. If the P-38 can change that equation, if this aircraft can provide the range and speed to protect those bombers, then the risk is worth taking. Harker closed his clipboard. Through the hangar windows, dawn light broke across Ohio flatlands, illuminating fields still brown from winter, factory smoke rising from Dayton's industrial districts where production lines worked around the clock manufacturing war material. America's industrial capacity was unmatched, but capacity meant nothing without operational effectiveness. The P-38 represented the cutting edge of American aviation engineering, but cutting edges were useless if they broke on first contact with reality. You'll have 2 weeks, Harker finally said. 2 weeks to prove this aircraft can operate reliably in European combat conditions. You'll fly solo training missions, logging at least 40 hours, demonstrating proficiency with all systems. You'll work directly with Lockheed's technical liaison officer to master cold weather procedures. You'll face a final evaluation flight supervised by General Kepner's staff. If you pass, if you convince them the P-38 is viable, you'll get your combat assignment. If you fail, the program ends, and you'll transfer to conventional fighters like every other pilot. Buck saluted sharply. Understood, sir. And Lieutenant? Harker added as Buck turned toward the aircraft. That farm boy mechanical intuition better be as good as you claim, because if you're wrong, you won't get a chance to apologize. March 1630, 1943. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and surrounding airspace. The P-38's cockpit felt like entering a cathedral designed by engineers, sacred, complex, intimidating. Buck climbed the boarding ladder at 05:30 hours, frost crunching under his boots. Ohio darkness still absolute except for hangar floodlights casting harsh shadows across the twin-boom fuselage. Temperature 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility unlimited. Barometric pressure 30.12 inches, rising. He'd spent the previous night memorizing startup sequences. Now his hands moved across the cockpit with mechanical precision. Battery switch on, fuel boost pumps engaged, mixture controls to idle cutoff, propeller governors to full increase RPM, throttles cracked 1 inch open. The twin Allison V1710 engines represented 200 horsepower of temperamental American engineering, liquid-cooled, turbocharged, counter-rotating to eliminate torque, each requiring individual management because asymmetric thrust could spin the aircraft into an unrecoverable flat spin. "Preheating intercoolers complete," announced Technical Sergeant Martin Kowalski through the radio headset. Kowalski was Lockheed's liaison officer, 48 years old, balding, spoke with the precision of someone who'd spent 30 years around experimental aircraft. He stood on the tarmac with a thermocouple gauge, verifying that the intercooler ducts had reached operational temperature. "Internal temperature 140 degrees. You're clear to energize." Buck engaged the energizer, heard the auxiliary power unit whine to life. Fuel pressure gauges climbed. Left engine 18 psi, right engine 18 psi. Oil temperature, barely moving, still below minimum. This was where conventional pilots made fatal mistakes. They rushed startup procedures, treating the P-38 like a forgiving trainer. The lightning demanded patience. 10 minutes passed while oil temperatures climbed toward 40 degrees, minimum for engine start without risking bearing damage. Buck used the time to recite emergency procedures silently. Engine fire at altitude, descend immediately, shut down fuel and mixture to affected engine, windmill propeller to prevent further damage, maintain asymmetric thrust with rudder trim. Single engine landing procedure. Approach at 140 mph indicated. Dead engine windmilling. Good engine at 35 inches manifold pressure. Land hot and fast because the lightning didn't forgive slow speed control loss. Finally, left oil temperature 42 degrees, right oil temperature 44 degrees. Engaging left engine, Buck announced. Mixture control to auto-rich. Propeller governor to 2200 RPM. Energizer to start position. The left, Allison coughed, backfired once, then caught with a deep-throated roar that shook the airframe. Oil pressure surged to 60 psi within 5 seconds. Good, no bearing damage. Exhaust smoke poured from the stub exhaust stacks, then cleared as combustion stabilized. Engine instruments showed green. Manifold pressure steady, RPM holding, fuel flow 120 gallons per hour at idle. Right engine start followed identical procedure. Within 90 seconds, both engines ran synchronized, counter-rotating propellers, creating a distinctive thrumming vibration that every P-38 pilot learned to interpret like a heartbeat. Healthy engine. Steady vibration at 85-90 beats per minute. Failing engine. Irregular stuttering suggesting intercooler ice formation or turbocharger malfunction. Buck's engines purred like content predators. The next 2 weeks became an immersion in aviation physics at its most demanding. Solo flights began with basic handling. Takeoff at 95 mph indicated, rotate smoothly to avoid asymmetric lift, retract landing gear immediately, climb at 170 mph indicated with manifold pressure at 44 inches and 2,600 RPM. The Lightning climbed like an express elevator, 3,200 feet per minute when properly managed. At 10,000 feet, Buck engaged turbochargers, maintaining manifold pressure as atmospheric pressure dropped. This was where pilots killed themselves. Advancing turbocharger wastegates too aggressively caused catastrophic overboosting. Buck adjusted in small increments, monitoring exhaust gas temperatures, keeping turbine speeds below redline. At 25,000 feet, he leveled off and began combat maneuvers. The P-38's twin-engine configuration created unique handling characteristics. In a hard turn, the outer engine generated more thrust than the inner engine due to differential airspeed across the propeller discs. Buck compensated with rudder, maintaining coordinated flight, feeling the aircraft's responses become second nature. The Lightning didn't forgive sloppy technique, but it rewarded precision, with performance no conventional fighter could match. Dive tests revealed the aircraft's breathtaking speed potential. From 28,000 feet, Buck rolled inverted and pulled through into a vertical dive, watching the airspeed indicator climb. 300 mph, 350, 400, 420, 443, maximum level flight speed achieved in a dive that turned the ground into a rapidly expanding blur. Compressibility effects began at 490 mph as shockwaves formed across the wing surfaces. The control stick growing heavy, the aircraft wanting to continue diving despite Buck's efforts to recover. He deployed dive brakes, another P-38 innovation, and felt the aircraft shudder as airflow disruption killed speed. At 10,000 feet he recovered smoothly, engines roaring, heart pounding from adrenaline, understanding viscerally why conventional pilots feared this aircraft. It demanded respect. It demanded mastery. Gunnery training sessions revealed the P-38's devastating firepower advantage. Conventional fighters mounted guns in the wings, requiring pilots to adjust for convergence, the distance where bullet streams from left and right wings intersected. Miss that convergence point by 50 feet, and half your ammunition flew uselessly past the target. The P-38 concentrated all armament in the nose, 4 Browning M2. 50 caliber machine guns, delivering 3,200 rounds per minute of combined fire, plus 1 Hispano 20mm autocannon firing high explosive shells. Buck practiced against towed banners, learning to place the illuminated gunsight reticle precisely on target, squeezing the trigger gently, watching fabric disintegrate under concentrated fire that would turn a German fighter into shredded metal. But the most critical training occurred at altitude in cold weather that replicated European combat conditions. Buck flew at 30,000 feet, where outside temperature dropped to -50 degrees Fahrenheit. Cockpit heating struggled to maintain survivable conditions. The manual recommended heated suits, but Buck flew in standard gear, learning the aircraft's limitations firsthand. His fingers ached despite gloves. His breath froze on the canopy interior. The engines ran rough until he adjusted mixture controls to compensate for reduced atmospheric oxygen. This was where the P-38's sophistication became essential, managing 2 engines, 2 turbochargers, 2 sets of cooling systems, maintaining symmetrical thrust while adjusting for altitude and temperature simultaneously. One training flight nearly killed him. March 24, 1943, at 32,000 feet over Pennsylvania. Buck was practicing intercept climbs when the left engine intercooler iced over. Manifold pressure on the left engine dropped from 42 inches to 28 inches in 5 seconds. The aircraft yawed violently right as thrust differential created asymmetric forces. Less experienced pilots would have panicked, advanced the right throttle to compensate, created worse asymmetry, entered an unrecoverable spin. Buck's farm boy mechanical instincts took over immediately. Left mixture control to full rich, dumping extra fuel to prevent ice formation. Left turbocharger wastegate closed, routing exhaust gases through the intercooler ducts to melt accumulated ice. Rudder hard left to counter yaw. Right throttle back to match left engine's reduced power output. The aircraft stabilized, wallowing in thin air at dangerously low airspeed, 5,000 feet above the minimum altitude where recovery was possible. 30 seconds later, the left engine manifold pressure recovered as intercooler ice melted. Buck gradually restored symmetric thrust, resumed controlled flight, descended to warmer altitude where ice formation ceased. His hands shook during landing, but the lesson was invaluable. The P-38 would try to kill you if you didn't understand its systems, but it would also forgive you if you responded correctly. Sergeant Kowalski met him after shutdown, holding a thermocouple data recorder that had monitored engine parameters during the flight. You just survived what killed 3 pilots last month, Kowalski said flatly. You recognized intercooler icing within 2 seconds and executed perfect asymmetric thrust recovery. Most pilots would be dead. Buck climbed down from the cockpit, legs unsteady, mind replaying every decision. The manual describes intercooler icing symptoms on page 387. The recovery procedure is on page 391. Nobody reads that far. No, Kowalski agreed. They don't. By March 30th, Buck had logged 47 hours in the P-38, exceeding the required 40. He'd mastered cold weather start procedures, high-altitude engine management, emergency asymmetric thrust recovery, compressibility avoidance, and gunnery techniques that exploited the aircraft's concentrated firepower. Colonel Harker's evaluation board convened at 1400 hours. 3 senior officers with collective skepticism etched on their faces. Lieutenant Williamson, General William Kepner began, you're asking us to certify an aircraft for European combat that has a documented 73% mechanical abort rate. Convince us why we should. Buck stood at attention, uniform crisp, mind clear. Sir, the abort rate reflects pilot error, not aircraft deficiency. The P-38 requires technical mastery that our current training pipeline doesn't provide. Give me combat assignment with proper support, dedicated maintenance crews trained by Lockheed, pre-flight procedures that respect the aircraft's engineering, operational planning that exploits its unique capabilities, and I'll demonstrate that this fighter can change the air war over Europe. Silence hung in the room like suspended verdict. Finally, Kepner nodded. You'll deploy to England with the 55th Fighter Group. Your first combat mission launches in 2 weeks. Prove us wrong about the Lightning, Lieutenant, or prove us right. Either way, we'll finally have an answer. April 17th, 1943, 0845 hours, RAF Nuthampstead, England. The mission briefing room smelled of cigarette smoke, coffee, and suppressed fear. 42 bomber crews from the 306th Bombardment Group sat in wooden chairs, facing a wall-sized map of Europe. Red yarn stretching from England to Bremen, Germany, a 500-mile penetration into the Third Reich's industrial heartland. Target, A.G. Weser U-boat construction yards. Distance, beyond range of conventional P-47 escort fighters. Expected enemy resistance, severe. Buck stood in the back corner, the only P-38 pilot in a room full of B-17 Flying Fortress crews who carried 10-man crews each. The math was brutal. 420 men were about to fly into German airspace with no fighter escort for the final 200 miles. Luftwaffe intelligence would detect the formation crossing the Dutch coast. German radar stations would track their progress. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf 109s would assemble in overwhelming numbers and attack without mercy. Recent statistics painted a nightmarish picture. 19.8% loss rate on deep penetration missions. For every 5 bombers that departed, 1 never returned. 10 men vaporized by cannon fire, consumed by fire at altitude, or tumbling through frozen sky in aircraft too damaged to sustain flight. The crews in this room understood the odds. They'd written letters home before dawn, just in case. Gentlemen, began Colonel Curtis LeMay, his voice carrying the flat pragmatism that made him legendary and feared. We're hitting Bremen because U-boats are strangling Atlantic convoys. Every submarine that leaves those construction yards kills Allied sailors and delays the liberation of Europe. Your mission is to destroy those yards regardless of cost. Weather forecast: partly cloudy over target, visibility 6 miles, wind from northwest at 30 knots. Flak will be intense over Bremen, estimated 200 heavy anti-aircraft guns. Luftwaffe response will be maximum effort. A hand rose from the bomber crews. Sir, what fighter escort do we have? P-47 Thunderbolts will accompany you to the German border. They'll turn back at maximum range. For the final 200 miles to target and egress, you're on your own. LeMay paused, then added, except for 1 experimental escort asset. All eyes turned to Buck. Lieutenant Williamson will fly P-38 Lightning escort for the entire mission. His aircraft has the range to reach Bremen and return. Whether it can provide meaningful protection against concentrated German fighter formations, LeMay's skepticism was audible. We're about to find out. Buck felt 420 pairs of eyes assessing him. He looked absurdly young. Farm kid from Iowa, barely old enough to drink legally, standing next to a colonel who'd commanded combat operations before Buck learned to drive. But the P-38 waiting on the tarmac represented capability that transcended age or appearance. It represented American engineering at its most sophisticated, waiting for someone with courage and skill to unlock its potential. The formation launched at 09:45 hours. 42 B-17s lumbered into English sky, each loaded with 4,000 pounds of ordnance, climbing slowly toward assembly altitude. P-47 escorts joined at 15,000 feet, stubby, reliable, conventional fighters that would protect the bombers until their fuel tanks ran dry. Buck's P-38 climbed faster, reaching 25,000 feet while the formation was still assembling, orbiting above them like a guardian angel with twin tails and lethal intent. At 11:20 hours, the formation crossed the Dutch coast. German radar stations immediately detected them. Across occupied Europe, Luftwaffe fighter wings scrambled. JG-1 from Deelen Airfield, JG-26 from Lille-Vendeville, JG-11 from Husum. The standard German doctrine was devastating in its effectiveness. Allow P-47 escorts to depart, then mass fighters for coordinated assault on unprotected bombers. Focke-Wulf 190s would attack head-on, exploiting the B-17's relatively weak frontal armament, closing at combined speeds exceeding 500 mph, firing 20mm cannons and 13mm machine guns that shredded aluminum airframes. Messerschmitt Bf-109s would attack from above and behind, targeting engines and control surfaces. Standard procedure called for 30 to 40 German fighters, overwhelming bomber defensive fire through sheer numbers. At 11:45 hours, the P-47s turned back, fuel exhausted. Buck watched them depart, then keyed his radio. "Big friend to fortress formation. I have escort for the duration, maintaining top cover at 28,000 feet. The bomber commander's voice crackled back. "Roger, big friend. We see you up there. Do what you can." 20 minutes later, Buck spotted the first German formation, 27 Focke-Wulf 190s assembling at 32,000 feet, positioning for textbook head-on attack. They appeared as tiny specks against cloud formations, but Buck's trained eye recognized their tactical arrangement instantly. The Germans were confident, coordinated, preparing to execute a maneuver they'd practiced hundreds of times against helpless bombers. They didn't expect resistance. Buck advanced throttles to maximum power, 60 inches manifold pressure, 3,000 RPM, war emergency power activated. The twin Allisons screamed, propellers becoming blurred discs. The P-38 accelerating like physics itself demanded forward motion. Airspeed climbed, 350 mph, 380, 410, 430. At 443 mph, maximum speed no German fighter could match in level flight, Buck entered a shallow dive that added another 50 mph, turning his aircraft into a supersonic projectile by standards of 1943 aviation. The German formation leader never saw him coming. Buck approached from slightly above and behind, classic bounce position, with the sun at his back, rendering him invisible until terminal seconds. At 800 yards, he placed the gunsight reticle on the lead Focke-Wulf and squeezed the trigger. 4 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon opened fire simultaneously. The combined firepower, 3,200 rounds per minute plus high explosive shells, created a stream of destruction that no aircraft could survive. The lead FW-190 disintegrated, wings separating from fuselage, pilot killed instantly before he could react. Buck walked his fire through the formation, exploiting the P-38's concentrated nose-mounted armament to engage targets without worrying about convergence angles. Second FW-190, engine exploded in orange fireball. Third FW-190, cockpit shredded by 20mm shells, aircraft tumbling out of control. The German formation scattered in panic. They'd expected helpless bombers. They'd encountered a predator faster, deadlier, and flown by someone who understood angles and energy management like a graduate-level physics problem. Buck reversed hard left, banking vertically, engines roaring, executing a combat maneuver that would have spun a conventional fighter into fatal flat spin. The P-38's twin-engine configuration provided stability conventional fighters couldn't match. He rolled out directly behind a fleeing FW-190, closed to 400 yards, fired a 2-second burst. The German fighter's tail assembly disintegrated. Below, bomber crews watched in stunned disbelief as their single escort fighter dismantled an entire German formation in 90 seconds. Buck's radio remained silent. No time for communication, only action. He climbed back to altitude advantage, spotted a second German formation, 12 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, diving toward the bombers from 30,000 feet. Again, maximum power, again the dive that turned his aircraft into an unstoppable projectile. He intercepted the Bf-109s before they reached firing range, destroying 3 in vertical turning fight that exploited the P-38's superior high-altitude performance. German pilots radioed frantically to ground control. They reported an unknown Allied fighter, twin-engine configuration, unprecedented speed, devastating firepower, that violated every assumption about bomber escort capabilities. Intelligence officers in occupied territories struggled to comprehend reports that seemed tactically impossible. Single escort fighter engaging multiple formations successfully, sustaining combat for extended duration without withdrawing. The truth was simpler than German analysts realized. Buck had mastered an aircraft his own military had dismissed, exploited its unique capabilities with precision born from understanding rather than convention, and demonstrated that innovation properly applied could overcome numerical superiority. By 1340 hours, when the bomber formation completed its attack run and turned for home, Buck had engaged 6 German formations totaling 27 enemy aircraft, destroying or damaging sufficient numbers to disrupt coordinated attacks completely. Not a single bomber was lost to German fighters during his escort coverage. The mission succeeded because one farm kid from Iowa refused to accept that the useless lightning couldn't change the air war's fundamental equation. April 17, 1943, 15:20 hours, RAF Nothampstead, England. Buck's P-38 touchdown with fuel tanks, reading 32 gallons remaining, barely enough for 5 additional minutes of flight. He'd been airborne for 5 hours and 35 minutes, spending the majority at combat power settings that consumed fuel at catastrophic rates. The twin Allisons coughed as he taxied toward the hardstand, starved for fuel, running on fumes and determination. When he shut down engines, silence felt surreal after hours of mechanical thunder. His hands shook from adrenaline depletion and cold. Cockpit heating had failed over Germany, leaving him flying in -40-degree temperatures for 3 hours. His flight suit showed ice crystals where breath had frozen. His face was pale from hypoxia, despite oxygen mask. His body demanded rest, food, warmth. His mind replayed engagement sequences in perfect clarity. FW-190, leader disintegrating. Bf-109 spinning away, trailing smoke. Bomber formation intact because someone finally gave them protection that reached all the way to target. Ground crew swarmed the aircraft, staring at empty ammunition boxes, scorched gun barrels, battle damage from near-miss enemy fire. Sergeant Kowalski appeared, carrying his thermocouple recorder, face showing rare emotion. "Jesus Christ, Lieutenant. Telemetry shows you maintained war emergency power for 17 consecutive minutes. That's supposed to destroy the engines. You're supposed to be dead." Buck climbed down from the cockpit, legs unsteady. accepting a canteen of water from a mechanic, farm equipment back home. Dad always said machinery lasts longer if you understand its tolerances rather than its limitations. The Allison V1710 can sustain war emergency power if you manage oil temperature correctly, adjust mixture to compensate for thermal stress, and monitor exhaust gas temperature religiously. Lockheed's engineers designed these engines for sustained high-power operation. They just assumed pilots would read the technical documentation. Behind him, B-17s were landing in sequence, each bomber intact. Crews disembarking with expressions mixing relief and disbelief. They'd expected losses. Statistically, 8 bombers should have been shot down. Instead, 0 losses to enemy fighters. Only 2 aircraft showed significant damage, both from flak over Bremen, both repairable. 420 men would sleep in their barracks tonight, write letters home tomorrow, fly again next week, because one escort fighter had rewritten tactical assumptions. Colonel LeMay arrived in a staff car, exiting with his characteristic briskness. "Lieutenant Williamson, immediate report." Buck snapped to attention despite exhaustion. "Sir, mission successful. Bomber formation reached target and completed attack run without fighter losses. I engaged 6 enemy formations totaling approximately 27 aircraft, achieving confirmed destruction of 13 enemy fighters. Probable destruction of 6 additional, damage to 8 others. The P-38's range, speed, and firepower capabilities proved decisive. German formations were unable to coordinate effective attacks due to disruption of their tactical assembly. Enemy fighters demonstrated reluctance to press attacks after initial engagements, suggesting surprise at encountering long-range escort capability. LeMay studied Buck with the analytical precision that made him both legendary and intimidating. "You engaged 27 enemy aircraft solo. That's either the bravest thing I've witnessed, or the most reckless." Sir, it was the only tactical option that ensured bomber formation survival. The P-38's performance envelope allowed engagement of German formations before they reached firing range on bombers. Speed advantage meant I could dictate engagement parameters. Concentrated firepower meant brief bursts achieved aircraft destruction without extended combat exposure. The Lightning performed exactly as Lockheed engineers designed, provided the pilot understands the systems. Silence stretched while LeMay processed implications. The P-38 program had been scheduled for European theater cancellation. Procurement officers had drafted orders reassigning all Lightnings to Pacific operations, where warmer weather reduced mechanical complications. Generals had written official memoranda declaring the aircraft unsuitable. Yet here stood living proof that innovation properly applied could achieve results conventional wisdom deemed impossible. "I'm recommending immediate expansion of P-38 deployment to European theater," LeMay finally stated. "You'll train additional pilots on proper operational procedures. Maintenance crews will receive intensive technical education from Lockheed liaisons. The Lightning will become primary long-range escort for deep penetration bomber missions, and Lieutenant, effective immediately, you're promoted to captain and assigned command of the first dedicated P-38 squadron in the European theater." The weeks following April 17, 1943, transformed American air operations over Europe. Buck trained 32 pilots on P-38 systems, emphasizing technical mastery over brute force flying. Maintenance crews learned proper cold weather procedures, reducing mechanical abort rates from 73% to 12% within 60 days. Bomber losses on deep penetration missions dropped from 19.8% to 4.3% when P-38 escorts accompanied formations to target and back. German Luftwaffe intelligence reports reflected growing concern about Allied long-range escort capabilities that disrupted their tactical doctrine. Statistics validated Buck's achievement comprehensively. By December 1943, P-38 squadrons in Europe logged 18,500 combat hours, with 847 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed. The Lightning's unique capabilities, range, speed, firepower, high-altitude performance, proved decisive in protecting bomber formations during operations that crippled German industrial capacity. What military procurement officers had dismissed as useless became instrumental in achieving air superiority that made D-Day invasion possible. Buck's personal combat record expanded to 127 missions, 38 confirmed aerial victories, 0 losses of bombers under his direct escort. He survived the war, returned to Iowa in November 1945, resumed farming with the same methodical competence that had made him exceptional pilot. He married his high school sweetheart, raised 3 children, never spoke publicly about the day he engaged 27 German fighters solo until historians discovered mission records in 1968. When interviewed at age 73 for a documentary about food aviation, Buck maintained characteristic modesty. The P-38 wasn't useless. It was misunderstood. Sometimes the difference between failure and success is simply taking time to read the manual, trust the engineering, and refuse to accept that something can't be done because conventional wisdom says so. That applies to farming equipment, fighter aircraft, and most everything in life. The legacy extends beyond individual achievement. Buck's success proved that sophisticated technology requires sophisticated operation, that American innovation could overcome numerical disadvantage through superior engineering and operational mastery. The P-38 Lightning became symbol of American industrial and intellectual capacity, designed by brilliant minds in California, manufactured in factories across the nation, operated by farm kids and city boys who learned to master complexity rather than fear it. The aircraft ultimately destroyed more enemy planes than any other American fighter in certain theaters, escorted countless bombers safely to targets that broke German war production capacity, and demonstrated that dismissing innovation prematurely costs lives that courage and competence might save. The contrails Buck left across European skies that April morning represented more than tactical victory. They represented proof that American determination, when combined with technical excellence and individual courage, could rewrite rules established by generals who'd never read a 600-page manual or believed a farm kid from Iowa could master engineering complexity that intimidated experienced pilots. They represented validation of the principle that sophisticated tools reward sophisticated users, that innovation properly applied defeats conventional superiority, that single individuals with extraordinary competence can change outcomes previously deemed inevitable. 78 years later, restored P-38 Lightnings fly at air shows, their distinctive twin-boom profiles and counter-rotating propellers drawing crowds who marvel at the aircraft's elegance and power. Announcers tell the story of how the useless fighter became legendary escort, how generals who ordered cancellation eventually authorized expanded production, how one green pilot proved everyone wrong. Buck's name appears in aviation history texts as pioneer who demonstrated that mastery trumps skepticism, that reading technical manuals saves lives, that refusing to accept impossible opens pathways to extraordinary achievement. The farm in Iowa, where Buck learned to fix threshing machines, still operates, now managed by his grandchildren. On the wall of the farmhouse hangs a photograph. Young man in flight suit standing beside P-38 Lightning, smile confident, eyes reflecting knowledge that he'd just accomplished something tacticians deemed statistically impossible. Below the photograph, a simple plaque, Captain Robert Buck Williamson, USAAF, proved the impossible was simply waiting for someone brave enough to try. If this story of courage and innovation inspired you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into WW2's most incredible untold moments. Drop a comment below. What other dismissed technologies or underestimated heroes changed the course of the war? Your engagement helps us bring these forgotten stories back to life. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest victories come from refusing to accept that something can't be done.